Okay, guys, question. How much does Social Security contribute to our massive national debt? All right, here's the answer. Zip, zero, nada. Social Security does not add $1 to the national debt. Let me explain. Social Security was created by FDR, Franklin Delano Roosevelt, in the 1930s as part of the New Deal. The idea was to create an old age pension for Americans because millions of Americans would die poor in this country despite having worked all of their lives. So this idea was to create a version of a national pension for workers. And it was funded by something called the Federal Insurance Contributions Act, FICA. So when you look on your paycheck, you will see a line for the federal taxes that you have to pay. You'll see a line for the state taxes you have to pay. If you live in places like New York, you'll see local taxes you have to pay. Most places you'll pay local taxes as well. And you'll see this other separate line called FICA. That's what FICA is. It's the special contribution. Some people don't even consider it a tax because it's essentially they're taking some money from your paycheck and putting it in a trust fund to pay for your eventual retirement. And then you get a report. It actually comes every month once you start working that tells you how much you are going to receive. The employee pays half and your employer pays the other half. So up to a certain contribution limit, right? You pay like 6% and your employer pays like 6%. You both split the cost of it. They're matching your contribution to your retirement. And under the Social Security Act in 1965, President Lyndon Johnson, as part of his Great Society, created something additional called Medicare, which is basically health insurance for the aged, for old people, because people couldn't get insurance once they got old because they're no longer working. Right? And so this is the way that elderly people get healthcare. And in addition to that, he also created Medicaid, which is a totally separate thing. Medicaid is actually funded half by the federal government through federal taxes and half by state governments. And Obamacare is a part of that process. Medicaid, which is a sort of partnership between your state and the federal government. That's separate. But let's just talk about Social Security itself. So what has our federal government been doing with Social Security over the years? Because that specific money that comes in goes into what's called the Social Security Trust Fund. And as of now, that trust fund has about $2.5 trillion sitting there, right? And because it's not part of the federal taxes that are taken in, it's a totally separate pot of money that's invested in like super safe things like bonds to make sure that, the money goes back to the people when they retire. Our federal government, our Congresses over the last several decades have been raiding the money. They've been borrowing money from the trust fund and using it to backstop spending that they want to do, including tax cuts. Remember, when you do a tax cut, you are essentially depriving the federal government of federal funds, particularly from the rich, the super rich, right? Which is the 2004 tax cut by George W. Bush and the 2017 tax cut by Donald Trump. Those tax cuts heavily favored the super rich. So it deprived the federal government of that money, but you still have to fund the government. You still have to run the government. Well, how do you think that you get the money if you've given away and given up that money? You're raided from Social Security. You borrow it and you just don't pay it back. That's one of the problems that we have in terms of Social Security. So what can you do about that? Well, there are a few things. The way Social Security works, as I said, is that you and your employer split the cost of taking a percentage of your paycheck to put in this trust fund. But there's a limit on how much of your paycheck they can take. And that limit goes up along with inflation. So if you look here, it's always 6.2%, but they change the limit on how much of your money can be subject to this FICA tax, if we want to call it a tax. The limit is only about $132,000. It's just over 130 grand, meaning that if you make $133,000, that additional $1,000 is not subject to FICA at all. If you make $300,000 or $500,000 or $1 million a year, you're still only getting FICA taken out on the first 130 some odd thousand dollars. They don't take it on all the money you make, just on that that money up to that limit. And they take that same percentage rate all the time. So if you're saying that there's not enough money in Social Security to pay for the retirees who exist in this country right now, one way that you could change that is you could raise the cap. Another thing that contributes to Social Security are undocumented workers. If you are an immigrant worker with a green card and you work for a foreign company, you do not pay FICA. If you're a student, you don't pay FICA. But the people who are foreign-born workers, including undocumented workers, who work legitimate jobs, and there's a 90% worker participation rate among undocumented, particularly DACA. DACA people, they work. They're like 90+% of them work. When they get their paychecks, they also get FICA taken out, but they are not eligible to receive Social Security when they retire. So immigrants are actually keeping Social Security flush in a country that's got an aging population of domestically born people that are such a big group. Boomers and, even aging Gen Xers are going to retire, and there's just not enough young people that are going into the workforce to pay the FICA to make sure that it keeps up, right, with the money that's needed. So in theory, the more people that you make legal, the more people will pay the FICA. And deporting lots and lots of immigrants will immediately drain the FICA trust fund, because those people will no longer be drawing paychecks and paying into the trust fund. Another thing that theoretically, if Congress, the Republican Congress, because this is all Republicans now, Democrats don't control anything. If they wanted to fix Social Security, you could make it illegal to borrow from it. You could stop rating it, stop taking money from it and not paying it back. But of course, they're going to do the opposite, because at the end of next year, they're going to go in for another another Trump tax cut. And this Trump tax cut will probably be even bigger and give even more money to the Elon Musks and the Peter Thiels and the Richie Riches of the world, Jeff Bezos and Mark Zuckerberg. They're going to get like a massive tax cut. Huge. And they're going to have to still fund the government. And how do you think they're going to get it? Back to the trust fund again. And then there are those who would like to privatize the trust fund, meaning take that big, juicy $2.5 trillion in leveraged money because it's got liens on it, and give it to Wall Street people to invest in the market. And then what happens if Wall Street screws it up like they did in the 1930s and created the Great Depression, or like they did in 2007 when they created the Great Recession under George W. Bush? Because, Wall Street sometimes screws up in their investments. So that would mean the retirees who had this safe pot of money coming to them when they retire could end up with nothing, or even end up with less. And any disruption to the ability of people to survive in old age would be a catastrophe in this country. So just a thought that when people are talking about going after Social Security and Medicare, they do mean Medicare when they say Social Security, because it's the same source of money. You're talking about putting at risk senior citizens' retirement and their health care. I will come back at another time and do another whole thing on Obamacare, which is Medicaid, which is the other thing they would like to go after and take away from the people. All so that the rich can pay less and less and less taxes. That's what it's all about. That's what this election was about. The super rich and billionaires do not want to be taxed at all. They want to pay no taxes and earn endless profits. And they'll do anything they can to make that happen. So keep a weather eye on what they say and do in Washington about Social Security and Medicare. Thanks for listening. Peace.